1793. 10 years after the Treaty of Paris brings an end to the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers' bold experiment in democracy is already showing signs of fracturing. Following a lengthy and contentious ratification process, a new constitution has established a stronger federal government, and national hero George Washington has been elected its first president. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of that thesis of the common man, the Declaration of Independence, remains wary of the power granted to the new executive. This despite the fact that, as Washington's Secretary of State, he is now an essential part of it. For 3.5 years, the former American minister to France has watched enthusiastically as across the ocean the French depose of their king and spread the lights of liberty and equality across Europe. Meanwhile, his primary rival, the brilliant and brash Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, wants nothing more than to create a strong and respectable national government, on an equal footing with and modeled after aristocratic England. On February 1st, 1793, the French First Republic declares war on the Kingdom of Great Britain, and so lines are drawn on both sides of the Atlantic. Before the end of the decade, the United States will find itself entangled in a crisis of national unity, surpassed in its history only by the Civil War. In the process, America's first party system will emerge. Hamilton and his Federalists are unsettled by the radical influence the French Revolution has had on the common American. Already his so-called whiskey tax is under increasingly violent assault in Western backcountries. Meanwhile, his financial plan is dependent on duties from trade with Britain. Moneyed Federalist sympathies thus lie with the former mother country. America has already signed treaties with France, however, including the Treaty of Alliance of 1778, without which the United States would likely not exist as a country at all. That treaty included no end date and was never annulled. Thus, even after revolutionaries in France execute their erstwhile king, Louis XVI, Thomas Jefferson and his supporters, called Republicans and later Democratic Republicans, remain firmly allied with the French. On April 22nd, President Washington issues a proclamation of neutrality. Yet while he is loath to draw his young country into another war, he does not renounce the French treaties of 1778. Instead, he decides to welcome the new French minister to America, Edmond Charles Genet. This will prove to be one of the biggest mistakes of his presidency. At just 29 years old, Genet, known in the French revolutionary style as Citizen Genet, is all too ignorant of the undercurrents in American political opinion. Upon his arrival in South Carolina, he conspires with Revolutionary War veteran George Rogers Clark to raise an army of Americans for an attack against the Spanish in Louisiana. For a decade, the Spanish have denied American traders access to the port of New Orleans, and by extension, the invaluable Mississippi River. Jefferson thus privately offers his support to Genet, though with Spain still friendly to the United States, he cannot do so publicly. At the same time, however, Genet recruits Americans to serve as privateers against Britain, in direct violation of Washington's neutrality proclamation. Much to Jefferson's chagrin, Genet soon outfits a captured British ship, the Little Sarah, and sends it to sea in the service of France. Upon learning of Genet's actions, Washington is furious. Federalists, taking full advantage of the president's popularity, spread word of Genet's indiscretions and ignite public opinion against the French minister. In the end, Genet is recalled, and Republican leaders are forced to acknowledge the growing support for neutrality. Neutrality, however, proves difficult to maintain. By the spring of 1794, the British Royal Navy has seized 250 American ships trading with the French West Indies. Washington sends Chief Justice John Jay, a Federalist, to resolve this and other ongoing American differences with the British. Republicans are up in arms at this perceived betrayal of America's alliance with France. And the terms brought home in March of 1795 are even worse than they feared. As it is, Republicans have long sought to place retaliatory tariffs and trade restrictions against Great Britain. The Jay Treaty prohibits the United States from discriminating against British trade for 10 years and does not address the British practice of impressment, the forcing of American sailors to serve in the British Royal Navy. In return, Britain agrees to vacate the Northwest Territory, which it had already agreed to do in the Treaty of Paris, and opens the British West Indies to some American trading ships. In a stunning move with far-reaching consequences, George Washington declines to run for a third term as president. With no pre-established winner and still no formal parties, the election of 1796 produces a result which will prove all too rare in American history. As prescribed by the Constitution, electors in the Electoral College are each given 2 votes, with no distinction made between a vote for president and a vote for vice president. Despite the growing partisan hostility, some electors choose to vote along regional and not party lines. In the end, John Adams, a Federalist, is elected president, while a Republican, Jefferson, the second highest vote getter, is elected vice president. Upon learning of the Jay Treaty, the French retaliate by refusing to receive the new American ambassador to France, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, and by declaring any American ship carrying British goods liable to French seizure. In response, Adams takes a page out of Washington's playbook. In October of 1797, a diplomatic commission consisting of Charles Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry arrives in Paris. The cash-strapped French refuse to even meet with the commissioners unless the Americans first offer an apology, a loan, and a bribe. Marshall sends the president dispatches on the standoff. Upon receiving them, Adams announces the failure of the mission and calls for the arming of American merchant ships, the bolstering of coastal defenses, and the manufacturing of arms. Suspicious of the president's motives, Republicans demand that Marshall's dispatches be released to the public. When they are, however, the public's anger is directed not at the Adams administration, but at the insulting demands of the French intermediaries, who are referred to as X, Y, and Z in the redacted release. The Federalist rallying cry, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute," resonates with the American people. Meanwhile, Hamilton's financial plan is working wonders for the economy, and Spain has finally opened the port of New Orleans to American trade. With all this in their favor, the Federalist agenda rides a crest of overwhelming public support. In the aftermath of the XYZ Affair, the Federalist-led Congress repeals the treaties of 1778 and places an embargo on all trade with France. It creates the Department of the Navy and approves the building of 15 new warships, as well as the acquisition of sloops and galleys to protect coastal waters. As it is, Republicans have long mistrusted the Federalist desire to create a standing military that might later be used to suppress individual liberty. The waging of this so-called quasi-war against France is thus vehemently opposed by Republicans, who vent their frustrations via an increasingly venomous and partisan press. Amid these growing tensions, many Americans begin to fear the outbreak of a civil war, instigated by French spies and radical newspaper editors, perhaps in advance of a French invasion. Thus wary of emigrants in the press, Federalists pushed through a set of 4 laws collectively known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Naturalization Act extends the period necessary for immigrants to become naturalized citizens from 5 to 14 years. The Alien Friends Act allows the president to deport non-citizens determined to be dangerous to the peace, while the Alien Enemies Act gives the president the power to detain citizens of enemy nations in wartime. Perhaps most significantly, under the Sedition Act, false and malicious statements about the federal government are punishable by fine or even imprisonment of up to 2 years. Jefferson and the Republicans are appalled. The Alien Acts grant the president unprecedented power to remove political enemies, while the Sedition Act flies in the face of the First Amendment's guaranteed freedoms of speech and press. Tellingly, while the Sedition Act criminalizes malicious statements against the House, the Senate, and the president, it does not extend that protection to the vice president, namely Jefferson himself. In the end, many French citizens depart of their own accord, and ultimately no one is deported under the new laws. On the other hand, 10 men are convicted and punished under the Sedition Act, including Republican Congressman and printer Matthew Lyon, who was sentenced to 4 months in prison and given a $1,000 fine. While in jail, Lyon wins re-election by a 2-to-1 margin. In response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison draft the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, both of which emphasize the right of the states to resist what they deem to be unconstitutional laws. Jefferson's Kentucky statement goes so far as to assert the state's right to invalidate or nullify federal laws. While Madison's Virginia statement stops short of explicitly endorsing nullification, it affirms the state's right of protest and endorses a strict interpretation of the Constitution. 9 northern states reject the resolutions, while 4 southern states take no action. In 1803, Federalist-leaning Supreme Court Justice John Marshall will establish the precedent of judicial review of constitutionality in the landmark Marbury v. Madison case. In the end, the Federalist surge of the late 1790s is quelled by events around the world. Following the French Navy's defeat to the British at the Battle of the Nile, the threat of a French invasion recedes, taking the impetus for much of the Federalist platform with it. Moreover, Adams goes against the wishes of Hamilton and the so-called High Federalists by sending a second 3-man commission to make peace with France. This commission will later return with the Treaty of Mortefontaine, re-establishing free trade between the two nations and ending the Quasi-War. In the meantime, Hamilton publishes a letter denigrating the president's fitness for office. Though the letter is intended for Federalist eyes only, excerpts are leaked to the public by the Republican press. In the presidential election of 1800, for the first time in American history, both parties nominate formal tickets for president and vice president. With the French threat removed and the Federalists thus divided, Jefferson defeats Adams in the vote by the Electoral College. So too does Jefferson's vice presidential nominee, Aaron Burr, who, due to a failure on the part of the Republican electors, receives an equal number of votes as Jefferson. As prescribed by the Constitution, which will soon be amended, the election is decided by a contingent vote in the House, which Jefferson wins on the 36th ballot, ironically behind the support of one Alexander Hamilton. Within 20 years, the Federalist Party will disappear from the national stage. Meanwhile, Republicans will hold the White House for 7 consecutive terms until internal divisions lead to the birth of the second party system.